The invaders arrive. The sky was clear that morning, and for most people on Earth it seemed like just another ordinary day. Children played in the streets, people went to work, and the world continued on its usual pace. No one expected anything unusual. But in the deepest reaches of space, something was approaching, something that would change everything. Across the galaxy, a powerful alien race known as the Zorak had been watching Earth for centuries. They had studied humanity from a distance, learning about their strengths and weaknesses. They knew that Earth's technology was still primitive compared to theirs, and they believed that taking over the planet would be an easy task. The Zorak had conquered many worlds before, and they saw no reason why Earth would be any different. The first sign of their arrival came early in the morning. It wasn't a sudden explosion, but a strange ripple in the sky. People looked up, curious, as large dark shapes appeared far in the distance. At first, they thought it was some kind of weather phenomenon or maybe a military exercise. But the shapes grew larger, moving across the sky with eerie silence. Within minutes, the news stations began to broadcast strange images of these enormous ships descending from the sky. They were unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. Massive, dark, and covered in glowing symbols. The ships were so large that they blocked out the sun, casting a dark shadow over entire cities. Panic spread quickly. In the busy streets of New York, people stopped in their tracks, staring at the sky. Some took out their phones, recording the strange ships, while others whispered in fear, unsure of what to make of this bizarre sight. The world's leaders were already in meetings trying to make sense of the situation, but the military and defense systems were silent. They had no answers. Soon the alien ships began to land. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity had developed. The ships made no noise as they touched down, sending shockwaves through the ground. The moment they landed, the Zorak made their move. Small pods released from the ships and descended to Earth's surface. The aliens emerged from these pods, tall and imposing, their bodies encased in shimmering armor that seemed to pulse with energy. The Zorak stood motionless for a moment, observing their surroundings. Their eyes were like cold, unfeeling orbs, scanning the planet. They had studied humans for a long time, and now they were here to take what they wanted. Without warning, the invaders unleashed their first wave of attacks. Energy blasts erupted from their weapons, hitting buildings and turning them to rubble. The ground shook as the Zorak marched forward, their advanced technology proving unstoppable. Humans scrambled to escape, but there was no place to hide. The aliens moved with precision, their every step calculated and ruthless. Within hours, major cities around the world were in ruins. The Zorak's first strike had been swift and overwhelming. Governments tried to respond, but their military forces were no match for the alien invaders. Fighter jets and tanks fired at the Zorak, but their weapons only bounced off the invaders' armor. The resistance was futile. News outlets broadcasted scenes of destruction and panic as the world watched in horror. In the streets, chaos reigned. People screamed and ran, trying to find safety, but there was no escape. Every corner of the globe seemed to be under attack. The Zorak moved with cold precision, and it seemed like no one could stop them. In a small house on the outskirts of London, a family huddled together. The father, Mark, held his young daughter, Lily, tightly as they watched the news on their old television. The images of destruction played on the screen, but Mark couldn't tear his eyes away. His mind raced, trying to think of what to do. How could they fight back against such an advanced force? "It's not possible," Mark muttered under his breath. "How can we even fight them?" Lily clung to him, her face pale with fear. "What do we do, Daddy?" "I don't know, sweetie," he whispered, holding her close. "I don't know." Elsewhere, in government bunkers and military command centers, world leaders were making frantic decisions. There was no plan, no strategy. This was something the world had never seen before. The aliens were too powerful, their weapons too advanced. The leaders of Earth sent desperate messages, pleading for help, but there was no response. As the hours passed, the Zorak began to establish control over major cities. They set up strange devices in the streets, sending out a low-frequency hum that made people feel sick. They moved swiftly, their cold eyes watching as they subjugated the planet. It seemed like nothing could stand in their way. But in the midst of all the destruction, a small group of people began to realize something. They saw the invaders not as gods or unstoppable forces, but as something that could be challenged. They weren't invincible, and there was still hope. But it would take more than just weapons to fight back against the Zorak. It would take something far deeper. For now, the world could only watch and wait as the alien invaders made their move. Humanity's future hung in the balance, and the first battle for Earth had just begun. Would the Zorak succeed in their mission, or would humanity find a way to fight back? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. Humanity's desperation. The world was shaken, but it wasn't broken yet. After the Zorak's devastating first strike, the global chaos only grew. For the first time in modern history, Earth was united by fear. Every country, from the towering skyscrapers of New York to the quiet villages of Africa, now faced the same terrifying enemy. The world had never seen anything like the Zorak. Their weapons were unstoppable, their ships impossible to penetrate, and their soldiers, cold, merciless giants. In the aftermath of the initial wave, humanity's leaders were scattered. There were no safe havens, no escape routes. The cities that had once thrived now lay in ruins, and the government structures that had held the planet together were crumbling. What was once thought of as a global superpower was now reduced to a fragmented group of survivors. It was a sobering reality, one that most people couldn't yet fully comprehend. In Washington, D.C., a large war room buzzed with frantic activity. The president, a calm woman in her early 50s, sat at the head of a long table. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp, focused as reports of the Zorak's continued attacks poured in. She clenched her jaw, trying to keep her composure. But deep inside, she felt it, an overwhelming sense of helplessness. "Can we do anything?" she asked, her voice betraying a slight tremor. A senior general stood up, his uniform covered in grime, eyes hollow from exhaustion. "We've tried everything, Madam President. Our Air Force gone, our ground forces scattered. The Zorak's weapons, they're unlike anything we've ever encountered. Our technology can't even scratch their armor." A long silence followed as everyone in the room processed his words. Outside, the sound of sirens blared, adding to the mounting tension. The nation was under attack, and there were no answers. Across the world, from London to Beijing, the story was the same. People were forced to face a truth they'd never imagined possible. The Earth, their home, was vulnerable. No military strategy, no technological advancements, nothing could save them. The Zorak had come to claim the planet, and nothing in humanity's arsenal seemed to be able to stop them. But in the midst of this global nightmare, something strange began to happen. It started with whispers. Rumors passed from one frightened person to another. A few scattered survivors, mostly from isolated towns and rural areas, began to talk about a group of individuals who had disappeared before the invasion. These were no ordinary people. They were scientists, engineers, and historians, individuals whose work had focused on ancient technologies and forgotten secrets. The rumors said that before the Zorak arrived, these people had been preparing for something, a threat they believed Earth might one day face. And it wasn't just a theory. According to some sources, they had uncovered something buried deep beneath the planet's surface, a long-lost technology, something that could potentially give humanity the upper hand against the invaders. The first group to investigate this claim was a team of scientists who had managed to escape the initial wave of destruction. They found an ancient map, passed down through generations but hidden in dusty old libraries. The map led them to an underground facility beneath the ruins of a forgotten city. There, deep within the earth, they discovered what could only be described as a marvel, a hidden superweapon from a time before recorded history. The weapon was a machine, its design far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. But as they studied it, doubts began to creep in. There was a problem. No one knew how to activate it. It was as if the weapon was waiting for the right moment, for someone with the knowledge to unlock its full potential. And in a world on the edge of annihilation, time was running out. As the days passed, the world's remaining forces continued to try and organize. Resistance movements began to form in the shattered cities, led by former soldiers and civilians who refused to give up. But there was a sense of futility in their efforts. Their weapons were useless against the Zorak, and their morale was dwindling. Despite their bravery, the invaders' relentless attacks made them realize something terrifying. If the Zorak weren't stopped soon, humanity would be finished. But then came a glimmer of hope. A small team of rebels, led by an ex-military officer named Jackson, managed to infiltrate a Zorak-controlled area in search of critical intelligence. They were armed only with basic weapons and stealth tactics, yet they somehow slipped past the invaders' powerful defenses. Their mission was simple: find out what the Zorak were planning and gather any weaknesses that could be used against them. What Jackson's team discovered was both shocking and terrifying. Hidden deep inside the Zorak's base, they found evidence that the invaders were not here just to conquer, but to harvest. Earth's resources, its minerals, its oceans, and even its atmosphere, were being drained to fuel their war machine. The Zorak had no intention of leaving, and once they had drained the planet dry, they would move on to another world, leaving Earth a barren wasteland. This discovery was the key. The Zorak's dependence on Earth's resources was their greatest vulnerability. The rebels managed to send a coded message back to the resistance, but the danger of being caught was immense. They didn't know how much time they had, but the truth was out. The Zorak had to be stopped before they could finish what they started. Back in the war room in Washington, the president read the intercepted message. The news was chilling, but it also sparked something in her, a fire that had been buried under fear and confusion. She stood up, determination in her eyes. "We may be losing the battle," she said, her voice firm. "But we will not lose the war. We have to fight back no matter what." The plan was set into motion. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was all they had left. The secret weapon, the ancient technology that had been discovered, would be humanity's last hope. But unlocking its full potential would take time. Time they didn't have. In the streets, amidst the burning ruins of what was once their world, people were beginning to rise. They saw now that they couldn't depend on governments or military power alone. They had to fight for their survival. And so, they began to unite. Soldiers, scientists, civilians, and rebels, ready to give everything for the chance to take back their world. But the clock was ticking. The Zorak were relentless, and they would stop at nothing to finish what they had started. Would humanity find the strength to fight back before it was too late? Or would they fall to the unstoppable force that had come from the stars? The battle for Earth had only just begun, and with each passing moment the stakes grew higher. The turning point, the situation on Earth grew increasingly dire with each passing hour. Entire cities lay in ruins, entire populations wiped out, and the Zorak's relentless advance seemed unstoppable. But amidst the ashes, a flicker of hope was beginning to take shape. Something hidden, something ancient, something that could change the course of the war. Humanity was starting to realize that their only chance at survival lay in the hands of those who had been preparing for something far beyond their understanding. They hadn't known it then, but this was their time. Deep beneath the earth, far from the battlefields, a small group of scientists, engineers, and ex-military personnel gathered in a hidden underground facility, a place once thought to be lost to time. The underground complex, built long before the modern world, was an enigma, its purpose buried beneath centuries of silence. Now, however, it had become humanity's last hope. The survivors had managed to locate the map that led them here, hidden in an ancient library that no one had thought to explore. But the journey had not been easy. The streets were dangerous, filled with Zorak patrols, and the journey to the facility had been fraught with near-constant threat. Yet, they had made it, and what they found was beyond anything they had hoped. The chamber they entered was vast, cold, and filled with strange technology that hummed with energy. It was clear that this was not an ordinary building. Everything inside seemed alien, even though it was crafted by human hands long before the modern world had even been born. Towering machines lined the walls, and at the center of the room stood an enormous structure that appeared to be a massive generator of some kind, an ancient weapon of unimaginable power. Dr. Evelyn Harris, a leading scientist and one of the survivors, approached the device with awe in her eyes. She had studied ancient technologies all her life, but nothing had prepared her for this. The machine before her seemed alive, its metal surface pulsating with an energy that defied explanation. It's unlike anything we've ever seen, she murmured, running her fingers over the cool, smooth surface. This could be the key to defeating the Zorak, but we don't even know how to turn it on. Beside her, Commander Alex Rains, the ex-military officer who had led the group to the facility, frowned. Do you think it's still functional? Can we use it? I don't know, Dr. Harris replied, her voice filled with uncertainty. We'll have to try, but we need more time. We don't have much time. The group of survivors, working together under immense pressure, began the long, painstaking task of understanding the ancient device. It was clear that this wasn't simply a weapon. It was a tool of unimaginable power, capable of reshaping the very fabric of reality itself. If they could unlock its secrets, it might be able to turn the tide in their favor. But there was something more, something that made them uneasy. The device wasn't just an offensive weapon. It had a connection to the Earth itself, as if it was part of the planet's very core. It was designed to protect, to heal, and to defend. But what kind of defense would it offer, and would they be able to control it once it was activated? Meanwhile, the world above ground was far from safe. The Zorak continued their merciless campaign, their fleets spreading across the globe, laying waste to cities and capturing resources. The destruction was unimaginable. Governments that had once been in power were now scattered, unable to offer any meaningful resistance. Yet in the heart of the chaos, pockets of humanity still fought back. One such group was led by Jackson, a former Special Forces officer who had become the symbol of the resistance. He had gathered a ragtag team of survivors, soldiers, civilians, and ordinary people who had decided they wouldn't give up. Together, they operated out of a small hidden base deep within a mountain range. They had no advanced weapons, no resources to speak of. But they had something the Zorak didn't expect: hope. The resistance had learned valuable information about the Zorak's weaknesses, knowledge gleaned from daring missions like the one Jackson had led into enemy territory. They had discovered that the Zorak weren't invincible. Their strength lay in their technology, yes, but their arrogance was their greatest vulnerability. They believed that Earth's human inhabitants were nothing more than an obstacle to their grand conquest, too weak to pose a real threat. It was a mistake the resistance was determined to exploit. Jackson stood before his team, his face hardened by days of constant fighting and loss. "We know what we're up against," he said, his voice steady but full of determination. "But we also know that they've underestimated us. We've got something they don't, our will to survive. And that will be their downfall." As the team prepared for the next phase of their plan, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening beneath the surface, something he didn't fully understand. Word had reached him about the ancient weapon discovered underground, but he had no idea what it could do or how it might help. All he knew was that they needed to act fast. If the Zorak weren't stopped soon, it would be too late for anyone. Back in the hidden facility, Dr. Harris had begun to understand more about the device. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a network designed to interface with the Earth's natural forces. But what did that mean? Could it control the planet's energy? Could it redirect the Zorak's weaponry back at them? The possibilities were overwhelming, but so was the risk. "Are you sure we can control this?" Commander Rains asked, his voice tinged with doubt. "I'm not sure of anything," Dr. Harris admitted, "but we have no choice. This is humanity's last shot. If we don't try, we're finished." The team worked tirelessly, deciphering the ancient symbols etched into the walls of the chamber, using every ounce of their combined knowledge to unlock the secrets of the device. But as they worked, an unsettling feeling began to creep in. They were unlocking something powerful, something that had been hidden for a reason. And then, just as the last puzzle piece fell into place, the entire facility shook. A low rumbling sound echoed through the chamber, like the earth itself was groaning in response. The machine at the center of the room came to life. Its surface began to glow, and energy crackled in the air, filling the room with an intense, almost overwhelming heat. The device hummed to life, its purpose now clear. It was ready to defend Earth. But at that moment, something unexpected happened. The Zorak, always one step ahead, had somehow detected the activation of the device. They had known that humanity was desperate, and they had prepared for this. In the skies above, the massive ships that had once been silent now began to descend in a new wave, more powerful, more ruthless. The countdown to Earth's survival had begun, and with it came the realization that the greatest battle for humanity's future was about to unfold. Could this ancient weapon be enough to turn the tide? Or was it too late to stop the Zorak from finishing what they had started? The answers would only come with the next strike, the fight that would determine whether Earth would survive or fall. The first strike back. The Earth trembled beneath the weight of destiny. The energy from the ancient device pulsed through the underground facility, sending waves of power into the very bones of the planet. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. The resistance members, who had worked tirelessly for days on end, looked at each other with a mix of awe and fear. The ancient machine, once dormant for eons, was now alive, and they had awakened it. But just as quickly, the moment of awe faded into urgency. The sound of distant Zorak ships echoed through the atmosphere, their ominous hum growing louder. The alien invaders were closing in, aware of the shift in power, aware that humanity was about to make its move. "Do you feel that?" Dr. Evelyn Harris whispered, staring at the glowing core of the machine. "It's responding to the planet itself. But how do we control it?" Commander Alex Rains, standing beside her, tightened his grip on the datapad in his hand. "We don't have time to figure out everything, we just have to trust it." With no other option, the team set the machine into motion, hoping that it would respond as they had feared and hoped, by unleashing something that could finally push the Zorak back. It wasn't perfect. They didn't fully understand what they were about to unleash, but they knew one thing. It was their only shot at survival. Outside, the skies were darkening as a massive fleet of Zorak ships descended upon the planet. This time, the invaders weren't just coming to conquer, they were coming to obliterate. Their ships were larger, their weapons more destructive, and they had brought their full force to bear. Cities across the world were already burning from previous attacks, but now, the Zorak had set their sights on wiping out the last remaining human resistance. But they hadn't counted on humanity's spirit. Jackson and his team, the brave resistance fighters who had battled their way across hostile terrain to learn the Zorak's secrets, were preparing for their own confrontation with the invaders. They had a plan, one that would target Zorak supply lines and strike at their vulnerable points. But Jackson knew this would be no easy task. They had no advanced weapons. Their efforts had been fueled by desperation, grit, and the faint hope that something, anything, might give them an edge. As Jackson and his team made their final preparations, his mind kept returning to the ancient weapon. He had heard whispers of it, the strange energy pulsing from below the earth. He didn't know what it was, but he had to believe it was their only hope. With the Zorak's fleet rapidly closing in, there was no time to waste. "We can't wait any longer," Jackson said, his voice low but filled with determination. "We hit them hard and fast. We don't stop until we make them pay for everything they've taken." His team nodded, a mix of soldiers, engineers, and civilians, all bound by one thing: their will to fight for their survival. They had no illusions that victory would come easily, but if they didn't strike now, it might be too late. Above ground, the battle began. Zorak ships filled the sky like a dark storm, their massive forms casting shadows over cities already in ruins. They released their robotic foot soldiers, tall, armored beings who swarmed through streets, killing on sight. The streets were filled with the sound of explosions, the crackle of energy blasts, and the cries of humanity desperately trying to resist. But the odds were stacked against them. The Zorak's technology was unmatched. They had weapons capable of turning entire buildings into dust with a single strike. And as the resistance in the city struggled, it seemed that nothing could halt the alien invasion. The soldiers of the Zorak were ruthless, relentless, and seemingly invincible. Then came the first sign that the tide was turning. Back at the underground facility, Dr. Harris and Commander Rains had finally activated the central control system of the ancient weapon. It hummed to life with an intensity that rattled the very earth beneath them. The glowing energy at the center of the machine surged, and the walls of the facility seemed to crackle with power. The very air itself was charged with an unseen force. "What is this?" Dr. Harris breathed, watching as the machines surrounding them hummed louder, their energy output increasing exponentially. It's resonating with the planet," Rains muttered, eyes wide with realization. "We've tapped into something deeper than we expected." The machines seemed to be in perfect harmony with Earth's natural energy, like they were meant to work together. The glow intensified, pulsing like a heartbeat. The device was attuned to the Earth's very core, and just as the Zorak made their next wave of attacks on major cities, the Earth responded. A shockwave of pure, concentrated energy blasted from the facility. It was as if the entire planet had unleashed its fury in one massive, deafening strike. The Zorak ships, hovering high above, were caught off guard. The energy slammed into their hulls with an intensity they hadn't anticipated. The blast tore through their shields like paper, creating massive explosions that rocked the skies. The Zorak forces staggered, caught in an unexpected attack. Several ships fell from the sky, crashing into the earth in fiery explosions. But this was just the beginning. All across the planet, the ground itself began to respond. Earthquakes rattled the cities and energy pulses surged through the atmosphere. The ancient device had unleashed a force unlike anything humanity had ever seen. A power drawn directly from the planet's core, a force that seemed to amplify with each passing moment. Back on the battlefield, Jackson's resistance fighters watched in awe as the world around them began to change. The Zorak forces were disoriented, struggling to recover from the unforeseen attack. The pulse of energy from the underground machine had caused a ripple effect across the battlefield, knocking the invaders' advanced systems offline. "Now's our chance," Jackson barked. "Move out!" With the Zorak's technological advantage temporarily disrupted, the resistance launched their attack. They moved with a ferocity and determination born from the realization that this was their moment. Their weapons, though primitive compared to the Zorak's, now had a fighting chance. They hit the invaders' supply lines, attacking from unexpected angles, throwing the Zorak into chaos. The Zorak, realizing the scale of the threat they now faced, sent reinforcements, but it was too late. Jackson's team had already taken down key communication towers, disabled several transport ships, and disrupted their advanced weapon systems. It was clear now that humanity could strike back, and that the invaders were not as invincible as they had once believed. Yet, as the resistance celebrated their small victories, the battle was far from over. The Zorak were regrouping, and their counterattack would come swiftly. But humanity had finally proven that it wasn't helpless. With the power of the ancient device and the resilience of the human spirit, the tide had begun to shift. In the skies, the battle raged on. The Zorak had suffered their first real defeat, but their desire to crush humanity was far from satisfied. The question now was not if the humans could win, but how much they were willing to sacrifice to survive. For the first time since the invasion began, the Zorak were on the defensive. They had underestimated humanity, and now they would learn that the human race, when pushed to the brink, was capable of unimaginable things. This was just the beginning. The resistance had taken the first step in reclaiming their world. But with the Zorak regrouping and their full strength yet to be unleashed, humanity knew the hardest battles were still to come. And they would need to be prepared, for the ultimate test was just around the corner. The invasion escalates. The atmosphere on Earth had shifted dramatically. For the first time since the Zorak invasion began, humanity felt a spark of hope, a glimmer of potential victory. The ancient weapon had bought them a precious moment, a brief window of time to strike back. But the Zorak were far from defeated, and they weren't going to let a few setbacks stop their plans. Above, the skies were once again filled with the dark silhouettes of Zorak ships. The damage they had suffered from the unexpected pulse of energy from the ancient device was temporary, a momentary glitch in their otherwise perfect machine of destruction. They were far from helpless. They had lost ships, yes, but they were far from out of the fight. The Zorak were evolving their strategy, adapting faster than humanity had anticipated. In every major city, the survivors had regrouped. The resistance had grown stronger, now operating in larger, more organized cells. People were fighting back, attacking the Zorak with whatever weapons they could scavenge. Yet, in the face of an enemy who could control entire fleets of advanced ships and weapons, every victory seemed fleeting. The cost of each small win was high, and the pressure to hold the line was crushing. In the heart of what had once been Paris, now reduced to rubble, Jackson stood overlooking the remnants of his once proud city. His resistance group had taken out several Zorak supply lines here, but the victory came at a steep price. The streets were littered with debris, and the air was thick with the smell of smoke and burning ruins. Their morale was low, and the weight of the war was beginning to show on every fighter's face. "Jackson, we can't keep this up forever," Lieutenant Ramirez said, her voice strained. She was holding a map, pointing to Zorak encampments further north. "We're losing more every day. The Zorak have shifted to a more aggressive tactic. They're targeting civilian survivors now, rounding them up. We need to figure out where they're taking them." Jackson nodded grimly. He had heard the rumors, whispers that the Zorak weren't just invading Earth for its resources. They were doing something far worse, something that went beyond simple conquest. The survivors, the captured civilians, were being taken to hidden Zorak bases where they were being harvested. But what for? The resistance had no answers, only questions, and no time to find them. "What do we know about the Zorak's next move?" Jackson asked. "They're regrouping, adapting," Ramirez replied. "They've learned from the pulse attack. Their shields are reinforced now, and their weapons are more precise. They're not underestimating us anymore, and they're not holding back." Jackson felt the weight of her words. The resistance might have slowed the Zorak's advance, but they were still very much on the offensive, and they were getting stronger. Humanity had a few victories, but those small moments of triumph were not enough to turn the tide of the war. Not yet. Back underground, in the hidden facility where the ancient weapon had been activated, Dr. Evelyn Harris and Commander Rains were working tirelessly to figure out how to maximize the power of the device. Their earlier success in disrupting the Zorak forces had proven the device's power, but it was clear that they had only scratched the surface. The Zorak were now adapting, and if humanity was to stand a chance, they needed to understand how to harness the full potential of the ancient technology. "Every time we power this up, it reacts with the planet's core, creating a pulse," Dr. Harris said, examining the data on her screen. "The problem is the Zorak are learning how to counteract it. Their shields are getting stronger, and their tactics are becoming more coordinated. Can we adjust the device to bypass their shields?" Rains asked. "I think so, but it's dangerous," Harris said, shaking her head. "This technology is centuries ahead of anything we've ever built. It's volatile. If we push it too far, we might trigger something worse, something beyond our control." Rains leaned over the table, his eyes fixed on the screen. "We don't have a choice, Evelyn. The Zorak are closing in. If we don't push this now, it's over." Harris hesitated for a moment before nodding. "All right. We'll increase the output, focus it on their central command. But we'll need more power. We'll have to tap into the energy grid." The decision was made, and the team immediately set to work. They connected the ancient device to Earth's remaining energy grid, carefully siphoning power from the remaining functional cities. The process was delicate and risky, but the resistance had no choice but to take the gamble. Above ground, the Zorak were fully aware that humanity was trying something new. Their sensors had detected the increased energy output, the unusual power surges, and they were prepared to retaliate. Their commanders, once confident that Earth would be theirs within days, were beginning to grow impatient. The Resistance's newfound resolve had thrown a wrench into their plans. The Zorak needed to act quickly to neutralize the human threat before their victory slipped from their grasp. In the skies above the city, a new wave of Zorak ships arrived. This was different from anything they had brought before. These ships were larger, armed with devastating new weapons designed to pierce through any form of defense. Their fleet descended like a storm, their massive dark forms blotting out the sun. Humanity's temporary reprieve had ended, and the Zorak were coming for the final push. "We've detected a massive fleet," Lieutenant Ramirez said, her voice tense as she looked at the satellite feed. "They're coming down on us with everything they've got." Jackson's heart raced. This is it. We either make our stand here or we're finished. He turned to his team. "We don't have much time. We hit them with everything we've got. No holding back. Our survival depends on this fight." As the Zorak ships neared, the world seemed to hold its breath. The human forces had one advantage now. The ancient device was nearing activation, and the power from the Earth itself was now coursing through it. If they could use it just right, it could turn the tide of the war. But the question remained, would they have enough time to fully unlock its power before the Zorak descended upon them? In the hidden facility, Dr. Harris activated the device, sending a surge of energy into the core of the Earth. The machine hummed to life and the walls began to shake. They were doing it. But it wasn't enough. The Zorak fleet was too close. They had to release the full force now, or it would be too late. As Jackson's team made their final preparations, the earth beneath them began to rumble in response to the device. The very ground seemed to pulse with energy, as if the planet itself was awakening from a long slumber. The world held its breath. The first blast from the ancient device shot through the sky with a roar. A beam of pure energy pierced through the Zorak fleet, ripping apart their shields and tearing through their ships like paper. The blast was overwhelming, its force sending shock waves that shook the ground beneath their feet. The Zorak fleet faltered, but it wasn't enough to break their resolve. They regrouped, retaliating with their own devastating weaponry. The battle was far from over. The Zorak had taken a hard hit, but they were far from finished. Humanity had fought back with all they had, but the war was escalating. The real test was yet to come. Would this attack be enough to stop the Zorak, or was humanity's last stand just beginning? The stakes had never been higher, and the cost of victory would be unimaginable. Only time would tell if humanity had the strength to hold its ground, or if the invasion would reach its terrifying conclusion. The final stand. The air was thick with tension. The pulse of energy from the ancient weapon had torn through the heart of the Zorak fleet, but the alien invaders were regrouping, their massive ships now flickering with renewed intensity. They had sustained damage, yes, but they were not broken. The Zorak, ruthless and methodical, had weathered worse storms and were preparing for their final offensive. They knew that the humans had one last card to play, the ancient device beneath the earth. And this time they weren't going to make the same mistake twice. In the heart of the human resistance, everything was coming to a head. Jackson stood at the front lines, his face grim as he surveyed the battlefield. The city was in ruins. The once proud skyscrapers of the metropolis now lay in piles of debris, and the sounds of gunfire, explosions and screams filled the air. His team, a ragtag group of soldiers and survivors, had fought tirelessly to slow the Zorak's advance. But this was it, the final confrontation. The Zorak were closing in, their fleet hovering just beyond the atmosphere, their ground forces advancing through the shattered streets. Jackson's mind raced, but his voice was steady as he spoke to his team. "This is it. This is the moment we've all been waiting for. We either win or we lose everything." He turned to Lieutenant Ramirez, who was overseeing the operations from the command post. "How long until the device is fully charged?" 20 minutes, maybe less," she replied, her voice sharp despite the weariness in her eyes. "But the Zorak aren't going to give us that long." Jackson nodded. "Then we buy them time. We hold the line for as long as we can. They had one chance to push back the Zorak. The ancient device beneath the earth had proven itself powerful, but it still wasn't enough to take out the entire Zorak fleet. It had crippled their forces, but there was more to do. The Zorak had begun to adapt, reinforcing their ships with new shields and weapons. They knew the humans were trying to harness the planet's power, and they had no intention of letting that happen. As Jackson and his team prepared for the final push, the Zorak forces began to move in. The ground quaked under the weight of their advanced war machines, and their soldiers, monstrous towering creatures, marched forward with cold precision, destroying everything in their path. The resistance had set up makeshift barricades, but Jackson knew that they wouldn't hold for long. Every inch of ground would need to be fought for. In the distance, Jackson could see the Zorak Command Center, a massive, heavily fortified structure rising above the city like a black fortress. It was the heart of the invasion, and if humanity was going to have any hope of survival, it had to fall. The resistance fighters, armed with only basic weapons and a handful of modified military gear, were about to face the most difficult battle of their lives. But there was one thing they had that the Zorak didn't: the will to survive. Jackson had seen it in his people. In the quiet moments before the battle, he had watched them, not just soldiers, but civilians, farmers, scientists, and teachers, ready to give everything to protect their world. They had nothing left to lose, and in that desperation they found strength. The sky above crackled with energy as the Zorak ships positioned themselves for their final strike. Their cannons, capable of wiping out entire cities with a single shot, began to charge. The ground shook as massive energy beams were fired from the ships, smashing into the earth below, leaving craters the size of mountains. Yet, in the chaos, Jackson held firm. This was their last chance. "Hold the line," he shouted into his communicator. "We don't give them an inch." Deep underground, the Resistance's final hope was beginning to take shape. Dr. Evelyn Harris and Commander Alex Rains were in the heart of the hidden facility, working feverishly to finalize the activation of the ancient device. The room was filled with the hum of machines, and the air crackled with raw energy as the device charged to full power. But even with all the power at their disposal, they knew it wasn't enough. The Zorak were on the verge of launching their final assault, and if they didn't act now, humanity would be wiped out. "We're almost there," Dr. Harris said, her hands flying over the control panels. "Just a little longer." Alex's eyes never left the monitor. "How much time do we have?" "A few minutes. Maybe 5 if we're lucky." The stakes were higher than ever. The device was powerful, more powerful than anything humanity had ever seen, but it was also incredibly dangerous. They were using the planet's natural energy to create a pulse capable of taking out the Zorak ships. But the device could only be used once. Once it was activated, the entire energy core beneath the Earth would be depleted, and the planet's stability could be compromised. "We have no choice," Harris said, glancing up at him. "We've got to risk it. This is our last chance." Rains nodded grimly. There was no other way. The countdown to the device's activation began. They were about to launch the most powerful strike humanity had ever seen, but at what cost? Above ground, the Resistance continued to fight back, each member of Jackson's team giving everything they had. They fought with every ounce of energy, every drop of sweat and blood. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they had the advantage of knowing their terrain and having one final desperate hope in the form of the ancient device. The Zorak forces surged forward, their massive war machines firing relentlessly. The ground shook beneath their footsteps, and the sound of battle echoed across the city. The air was thick with smoke, the sky filled with the blinding flashes of explosions. Then, just as it seemed like the Resistance would be overwhelmed, the earth itself began to tremble. The ground cracked open, and a blinding light erupted from the depths of the planet. The ancient device had activated, sending a wave of energy surging through the Earth's core. A powerful pulse shot upwards, tearing through the atmosphere, and the Zorak fleet, already battered and weakened, felt the full force of it. The pulse hit their ships with a force unlike anything they had experienced before. Their shields buckled under the intensity, and several of the massive ships exploded in midair, raining debris onto the battlefield. The Zorak were reeling, their advanced technology unable to withstand the force of the planet's unleashed power. For the first time, humanity had the upper hand. But as the Zorak began to regroup and prepare their retaliation, Jackson knew that they couldn't stop now. This was only a temporary victory. The Zorak weren't done yet. They would adapt, and humanity needed to act fast. Jackson turned to his team. "We've got one shot at this. We hit their command center, now, while they're disoriented." With a fierce determination, they charged forward, fighting tooth and nail to reach the heart of the Zorak's operations. The city had become a battlefield, but now, with the full force of the ancient device's pulse, the Zorak were staggered. Humanity wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. This was the moment they had been fighting for. The final stand had begun. Would humanity rise from the ashes, or would this be the last chapter of their story? Time was running out, and the Zorak were far from defeated. In the heart of the city, the battle raged on, and the fate of Earth hung in the balance. Victory and the future. The battle had reached its peak. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of burning ruins. What had once been the proud cities of Earth now lay in ruins, scattered with debris from the Zorak's relentless assault. Yet in the heart of this devastation, humanity was not defeated. The world had been pushed to its absolute limits, but it had not broken. The human spirit, once thought to be fragile in the face of such overwhelming power, had proven to be something far more formidable. Jackson stood in the wreckage of the city, the weight of what had happened and what was still to come, heavy on his shoulders. His body ached from the countless battles, but his eyes were unwavering. They had fought for so long, and against all odds, they had pushed the Zorak back. But they were not out of danger yet. The final battle had taken everything. The resistance, once a scattered group of survivors, had become a powerful force united by a single purpose: to protect their home. They had learned that when forced to the edge of extinction, humanity was capable of unimaginable things. They had fought for survival, for their children, for their future, and now, the world was on the cusp of reclaiming everything they had lost. Above, the skies were filled with the remnants of the Zorak fleet. Ships once invincible were now crippled or destroyed, falling to the earth like burning meteors. The energy pulse from the ancient device had shattered the invaders' defenses, but the Zorak had yet to fully retreat. They had one final weapon, an army of bioengineered soldiers, designed to survive the devastation of the planet's surface and fight on without rest. But even this final force was not enough to guarantee victory. In the heart of the city, the ground trembled again, and Jackson turned to his team. His face was grim, but his voice was resolute. "They're coming," Jackson said. "This is the last wave. We've taken down their fleet, but these creatures, they're unlike anything we've faced before." Lieutenant Ramirez, standing beside him, tightened her grip on her weapon. Her eyes burned with the same determination that had kept them fighting all this time. "We've made it this far. We finish this now, for Earth." The final wave of Zorak soldiers were already emerging from the shadows, monstrous figures, part machine, part alien, bred for destruction. Their sheer size was enough to send a wave of fear through the ranks of humanity's last defenders. These were not the sleek, towering ships of the invaders, but creatures designed to obliterate anything in their path. Their faces were twisted, masks of rage, their bodies covered in thick armor, making them near impervious to conventional weaponry. As they charged forward, Jackson's team, along with the remnants of the resistance, began their final push. They fought with everything they had, their weapons firing non-stop as they took cover behind wreckage and broken buildings. Explosions rang out as they used everything in their power to stop the creatures from advancing further into the city. In the distance, the ancient device hummed with power still drawing from the Earth's core, sending out pulses of energy every few moments. The ground shook with each blast, and the air seemed to pulse with raw, unrelenting energy. Humanity's last weapon was ready. They had one chance to end this, one chance to turn the tide permanently. But the Zorak were adapting quickly. Their bioengineered soldiers had been designed to learn and counter any threat. They had anticipated humanity's use of the device. The creatures now wore armor that adapted to the energy pulses, deflecting the blows that had once been enough to bring down their ships. Jackson's breath was heavy and sweat dripped from his brow as he looked around. His team was holding their ground, but they were slowly being pushed back. Time was running out. "Ramirez!" Jackson shouted over the chaos. "We need to disable the creature's adaptive shields. If we can disrupt them, the device can finish what we started." Ramirez's eyes widened as she understood the plan. "How do we do that?" "We need to get to the power core of the Zorax command center," Jackson said, already moving toward a shattered building across the street. "It's the heart of their adaptive technology. If we can hit it, we'll disable their defenses long enough for the device to hit them." With no time to waste, Jackson and his team sprinted across the battlefield, weaving between crumbling buildings and dodging enemy fire. They had only moments before the Zorak would complete their final assault, and their window of opportunity was closing fast. The Zorak creatures were closing in, but the Resistance had one last trick up their sleeve. They reached the command center, an imposing structure of black metal and alien technology. The doors were guarded by the fiercest of the bioengineered soldiers, but the team pushed through, using everything they had left to fight their way inside. Once inside, Jackson's team fought their way to the central core. It was a massive, pulsating machine, the heart of the Zorak's defenses. The Zorak had designed this structure to withstand anything, except for one thing: human ingenuity. With a single calculated strike, Ramirez fired on the core, sending a surge of energy through the structure. The building shook as sparks flew from the walls, and the creatures outside seemed to falter. "Yes!" Ramirez shouted. "It's working!" The ground trembled again as the energy from the device surged outward, this time piercing through the Zorak soldiers' shields with lethal precision. The pulse from the ancient weapon collided with the core, sending a shockwave that disintegrated the bioengineered soldiers in an instant. The tide of battle had shifted, but the cost of victory had been high. Jackson could feel it in his bones. The device, which had proven so powerful, had drained the planet's energy to its core. The Earth was unstable, its life force rapidly depleting. The device had done its job, but it had also started to unravel the very fabric of the planet. "Get out of there!" Jackson shouted as the walls of the command center began to collapse. "We have to move now." With the Zorak forces disoriented and the last of their soldiers disintegrating under the pulse of the device, the Resistance began their retreat. Jackson and his team made their way back to the surface, where the remnants of humanity's forces were regrouping. The Zorak were defeated, their invasion halted, but at a terrible cost. The world was changed. The Zorak had been repelled, their fleets destroyed, and their bioengineered soldiers wiped out. Earth had survived, but the planet's energy reserves were dangerously low. The device had drained the very core of the Earth, and there was no telling how much time humanity had left before the consequences of their victory caught up with them. Jackson stood on the ruins of the battlefield, his heart heavy with the weight of what they had sacrificed. But there was something else in his eyes, a flicker of hope. Humanity had endured. They had faced the impossible and fought back. Now they had a future, a chance to rebuild. Beside him, Ramirez looked up at the sky, where the remnants of the Zorak ship still smoldered in the distance. "We've won, Jackson. But what comes next?" Jackson exhaled deeply, his gaze unwavering. "We rebuild, we survive, and we make sure that the mistakes of the past are never repeated." The future of Earth was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity had found its strength. The war had tested them, pushed them to the edge, but they had proven that when faced with extinction, they would not go quietly into the night. Earth had fought back and had won. But as Jackson looked at the horizon, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Zorak were defeated, but there were countless other threats out there, in the dark corners of space. And humanity, though victorious, was forever changed. The war was over. But the journey of survival, of rebuilding, was just beginning. And this time, humanity would be ready.